breakout session hosted by DARPA's Defense Sciences Office. I'm Ivan Amato. I am a member of the communications team of DARPA, and I will be moderating what I'm sure will be an engaging, provocative, hopefully for some of you even a catalytic discussion over the next 70 minutes or so. DSO, the Defense Sciences Office, is one of DARPA's 6 technical offices, and these are the offices that conceive of and orchestrate the advanced research projects of DARPA. That's the ARP of DARPA. And DSO, among these 6 offices, is the one most immersed in fundamental science and mathematics as it strives to transform existing areas of science and technology and to, at times, even create new ones. Now, before I move into the program itself, I just want to share with you a kind of insight that's been slowly coming to me throughout the meeting as I'm hearing all of the great plenary talks and listening to everything, watching everything going on in the demo hall. And this is it, that here we are in the present moment at, wait what, a future technology forum. And so what this means is that we are at a meeting in the future right now. It does not get more DARPA than that. Now, I'm going to steal, as you're pondering that imponderable, I'm going to steal a little bit of the thunder, just a little bit, from the discussion leaders by telling you about one theme that you'll hear about, and you've already heard about it, and this is the sort of coevolution of human and brain intelligence into some kind of superintelligence that perhaps is what we will have to move toward, and we are moving toward that, if we are to successfully engage the ever more complex natural phenomena that are of interest to us, and if we are to understand and manage the incredibly complex technological systems that are coming our way, including the Internet of Things, and we'll hear a little bit about that. But we all here right now can in some ways live out this kind of hybridization of human and machine intelligence. And the way we can do this, the way you can do that, how many of you have been using the app? Great, great. So if you go to your app and you go to the schedule button at the top and then scroll on down to this particular part of the entire meeting, which is Science Disrupted 2, and then when you get there, you hit the activity button at the top. This will now place you into sort of a Twitter-like environment where then you can tweet. You can input questions, comments into the field at the bottom, and everyone who else is doing that will then see this in real time. And so what that will do, in a sense, is join all of you who are doing that together in a kind of groupthink. But the only way that's possible is through your machine collaborator, which is to say all of the chips and all of the technologies that are in that smartphone that you're looking down at. So you should have permission to both look up at what's happening here and later at the 3 microphones that are distributed in the room. So you can look up, but you can also look down, but only intermittently, because I do want you to pay attention up here for the most part. And there's also another part of the app that either now or later that we'll want you to look at, and that's the survey question that DSO has put up there. And that question is posed to you is, what is the next great disruption that should or could be something we all strive to create and engage, and why? So, and what would be interesting to us is if you really do answer those questions, and we'll take a look at that, compile those into some kind of narrative, some kind of way that we can share with you so that you can all know what you collectively think about that question. So let me now move into the program itself, which is the good stuff, where we're going to hear our 3 DSO program managers. But before I do that, I just want to parse out the name of this particular breakout session, which is Science Disrupted, Beyond the Limits of Intuition, Computation, and Measurement. So the science part, the only thing I want to say about that is something that I think we probably all agree to, and that's that science is the most powerful framework for provisional knowledge generation the world has ever seen. That's all I'm going to say about science. Disruption or disrupted, well, the pundit class took hold of that about 2 decades ago and started to apply it to anything in the human experience in which the rate of change is greater than something incremental or evolutionary. And then the third part of the title of this breakout session, Beyond the Limits of Intuition, Computation, and Measurement. So the last three the three words, the big words, intuition, computation, and measurement, roughly map onto sort of the three main pillars of the scientific enterprise. And by that I mean theoretical science, simulation science, and experimental science. But the front of that, beyond the limits of these, indicates both that there are limits to these important parts of the scientific practice and enterprise, but that those limits also can be transcended. And that's going to be one of the themes of this discussion here, and I hope that all of you are going to be thinking about that, and we'll share your views on that at the microphones when we switch into sort of the all-room discussion mode. So here's how the rest of the session will go. I will call up in sequence these three program managers of DSO. I will start with John Main, and he will talk to us about how all of the important stuff happens at interfaces of mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets. So he will then set up our next speaker quite well, who will focus in on a theme that we've heard quite a bit throughout the meeting, and we'll hear about it again from a different perspective, and that's the particular interfaces between human intelligence, human brains and intelligence, and machine brains and intelligence, and how those are hybridizing perhaps into, in an interesting way that John Pashkowitz will tell us about. And then finishing up our trio here will be Adam Russell, who will be taking a look at where all of these interfaces end up, or the hub of all interfaces, and that is where the humans are in this loop, and they are in the loop at every single one of these interfaces. I encourage you to look at your app also where it says speakers, and you can find out about who these folks are, a little bit biographical information there. And then after our speakers are finished, I will invite everybody here, or at least some of you. We had so many questioners first time around that we couldn't get to everybody. But when we get to that stage, I will ask you to come up to the three microphones, and then we will engage in really what is a room-wide discussion. And so let us get to the good stuff, and that's going to start with John Main.
Thanks, Ivan. So this is going to be a good session because I already learned something, which is apparently there's an entire socioeconomic class of pundits. Is that?
I call them
mostly okay.
The pundit class.
Mostly in Washington, D.C., I guess. So I want to talk a little bit about interfaces, mostly because I think interfaces currently are really, really important to us, and they're very likely to get much more important to us in the near future. But I first want to talk, I'm going to get there, but I want to start here, because I love old maps, and this is actually a fairly famous old map. This is called the Carta Marina. It's actually a map from the early 1500s, and the peninsula in the middle is the Scandinavian peninsula, and out to the west of the Scandinavian peninsula is the frontier, which happens to be the Atlantic Ocean. And at this point, it was still the frontier, right? And it's important to realize who was creating maps in the early 1500s. These are the most highly qualified technologists of their day. They were the navigators and the clockmakers and the mathematicians of that era. And so this was a fairly accurate map, but what I found interesting about this map was how they represented the unknown. These were the scientists of their day, and they chose to represent the frontier, or what could happen in the frontier, by sticking a bunch of fantastical creatures out there in the ocean. There's dragons and crazy fish and giant lobsters and serpents and all sorts of things out there. These were people that spent their life at sea. There's no way they actually thought there were gigantic serpents out there in the Atlantic. And so what they were telling us with these maps really is kind of boils down to a simple saying. But they're telling you, if you want to go out here on the frontier, prepare for a dragon, and be happy if you find something that's much more benign. Basically, it's prepare for the worst, hope for the best, right? And so I started thinking about this, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and I started thinking about what sort of, we've kind of explored most of the oceans, but what sort of metaphorical oceans surround us now? And one of the oceans that really started to loom large in my thoughts was the ocean of interfaces around us. And so the world map looks dramatically different to our eyes today than it did to those scientists then. Because to me, the world now looks like a whole bunch of interlocking networks, right? There's social networks and data networks and work networks and all sorts of networks. And as these networks get larger and larger and more interlocking, the performance of these networks is actually going to be dominated by the performance of the interfaces. okay? And I'm using interface in a very, very broad term. A conversation could be an interface. An email is an interface. Posting on Reddit is an interface. Posting on the Wait What app is an interface, right? And an Ethernet cable is an interface. And I'm also going to, these networks have nodes on them. I'm also talking about nodes in a very, very general way. A node could be a person or machine. I really don't care, okay? So just to give you a feel for how pervasive interfaces are in our life, and sometimes invisibly so, I want everybody to do a little thought experiment with me, okay? Think about the number of different devices that you personally have that are connected to the internet, right? And so I can do that in my head. I'll do it real fast. I have 2 phones, right? I have a home computer, I have a work computer, I have a car, I've got 3 TVs, right? That gets me up to 8. I know I'm missing a couple. I have a couple of Wi-Fi devices in my house, and that gets me to 9, right? So hopefully you've thought through that a little bit. If you get to 10, just stop at 10. That's fine, all right? But how many people in this room have at least one connection to the internet? Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, come on. You know, participate, right? How many people have 2? Keep your hand up. Keep your hand up if you have 3, 4, 5. There's not many hands going down, all right? Let's just skip to 10. Anybody got 10? And so about half the hands went down when we went to 10. So the point is we are extraordinarily well connected now. I mean, it's hard to conceive of being more connected than we are right now. And it should actually translate that this connectedness should give us the ability to work complex problems much more rapidly and much more efficiently than we've been able to up until now. But it turns out that's not the case, okay? And so I'm an engineer, and there's 2 things engineers have to talk about in every presentation. One I'm about to talk about, and the other one I'll talk about later, all right? But the first one I've got to talk about is economics, all right? We are compelled by our profession to ask how much stuff costs. And the thing that keeps us from turning all that connectedness into the ability to work complex problems very, very well is an economic concept called bounded rationality. And bounded rationality is actually something that's very familiar to all of us. We see it a lot in our kids. We see it a lot in our students. It's never actually happened to me personally. But bounded rationality is what you're experiencing. It's what you're seeing when somebody says, you know, that's silly. Why did they do it that way, right? None of us in this room have ever said that about anything, right? And usually what's happening when somebody says that is they're a few facts short, right? They don't know a few critical pieces of information that drove the decision to do something a particular way away from the way that their preconceived notion would lead them to be. That's bounded rationality. The strict economic term is that I can't make a rational decision on anything that I don't have knowledge of, right? That's the strict definition of bounded rationality. So it's important in this discussion because the way you get around bounded rationality, because I'd certainly like to make better decisions. I want to make better, I'm a mechanical engineer, but I want to make better financial decisions, right? I want to make better decisions about my kids' education. I want to make all these decisions that I really don't have that much expertise at. And the way I get around bounded rationality is through interfaces, right? I interface with you. We share information. You have a certain set of expertise. I have a certain set of expertise. If we work together in a trusted, low barrier environment, we can mutually make a decision that pushes back the bounds of rationality around the expertise that we both share. And if you add more and more people to these sorts of networks, you can keep pushing back the bounds of rationality. The problem is that there's a limit on how far you can go, right? And if I have a system, again, my network could be people or machines, the links could be anything, or the interfaces could be anything. If I want to add something to that network, right, I want to make this system work better. I want to push back the bounds of rationality, but there's something getting in the way, right? And that something actually turns out to be thermodynamics. And there's a huge problem with thermodynamics. There's 4 laws of thermodynamics. There's not 4 principles of thermodynamics. There's not 4 ideas about thermodynamics. There's not 4 thoughts about thermodynamics. There's 4 laws of thermodynamics. You have to follow the 4 laws of thermodynamics. You can't say, we're not going to follow law 2 today, right? It's not like speeding, right? You have to follow these laws. And so what does thermodynamics tell me about adding nodes, adding interfaces to my network, and pushing back the bounds of rationality? Well, in thermodynamic terms, adding nodes and adding interfaces to a system means I want the entropy of that system to decrease, right? I want to get more organization. I want to have it be a more effective processor of information. But what thermodynamics actually tells me all the time, in fact, it's like the annoying parent. It's almost, sometimes it's like the policeman, sometimes it's like the annoying parent. It's telling us all the time that we can't do things. And so what thermodynamics actually tells us is that when we try to push back the bounds of rationality by making networks bigger, thermodynamics actually promises me that the only path that I am guaranteed is the path that will make things worse, right? The path that will be more disorganized, the path that will lead to poorer performance. And thermodynamics sort of promises, but not really, that there might just be a path to making things better, okay? And I want to make things better. So unfortunately, most of the systems that we want to interface to each other and most of the systems that we want to interface to people were actually not designed with those interfaces in mind, which probably puts them in that pile of, you can't make things better, right? The good news is that people can actually change their interfaces. People can learn new languages. People can learn new skills. And we can actually go back to these systems and engineer the interfaces sometimes in a way that will help us make these systems work better together. There was a nice talk by Neil Sandell earlier today talking about this, just that topic. So it's not without hope. So the standard number right now seems to be about 3 billion people connected to the internet, which is an amazing amount of sharing of data. We're all connected to the same network. We're all, we're almost too well connected to that network, right? If you have a security clearance, you probably think it's probably just a little bit too easy for data to flow around right now, right? And so what we want to do, or one of the things to note though, is we have this enormous amount of connectedness, but economic data tells us that the maximum size of effective companies hasn't changed in the last 50 years. It's exactly the same. So what we're running into is a situation where we're really good at moving data around, but we're not good at putting more disciplines under the same roof, whether that roof is a metal roof or an electronic roof. And if I want to start working on more complex problems, I've got to break through this barrier of bounded rationality. I've got to get more disciplines represented in a productive group, right? And this is an economic barrier, but economics is a technical discipline, and I think there's probably a technical solution. So if we want to work more complex problems in engineering and science and defense, we need to come up with seamless interfaces that allow us to turn our connectivity without bound, which is pretty much what we have right now, into rationality without bound. I actually think this is one of the, if not the, most compelling problems that face us today. Because if we can do this, if we can make human machines, collections of humans, work better than they work now, we can actually accelerate engineering development, science development, and all sorts of human progress. Thank you. Thanks for letting me throw down my personal gauntlet.
Well, thanks, John, for getting us started and talking about all of these interfaces. Perhaps if we really can get that figured out, we might go to something called Science 2.0. I'm not quite sure. But surely one of the most fascinating categories and most consequential categories of interfaces are those between humans, I should say, and computer machines, so human and computer interfaces. And taking us into that direction is John Pashkowitz. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivan. Just make sure my slides are advancing. So what I'd like to do is start off with a theme. I'm going to expand on some things that came up in some of the plenary talks during today's and yesterday's sessions. I'd like to start with a quote from J.C.R. Licklider. This is actually the man-machine symbiosis quote that Arthi led off with on the first day. This is it's just a little over 55 years old now at this point. And what it's basically saying is Licklider envisioned this future where humans and machines could work together in a way such that the combination of man plus machine would somehow be better than a man or a machine alone. Well, here we are, 55 years later, and I would assert that we still don't have the quantitative principles to actually design systems that actually can do that in a systematic and disciplined way. Right now, it's a very ad hoc, very heuristic exercise, and so I'd like to explore why is it that we still have this problem, and what is it that we could do about it, and hopefully provoke and engage you into a stimulating discussion about what we might want to do. So how many of you are familiar with the concept of centaurs? So a few of you. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, a centaur is basically this idea of a man-machine hybrid, and it's been most famously manifested in chess championships. There's these freestyle chess championships where men and machines can compete against men or machines, and the most famous result is in 2005. A team of 2 skilled amateurs and 3 very low-power computers actually beat both a supercomputer dedicated to chess and a chess grandmaster. And I believe it also beat the cyborg grandmaster, the chess grandmaster with a supercomputer. And really what that was about was having the correct kind of algorithms to amplify the human capability. So if we take that notion of centaurs and think about how we might use that to disrupt science or disrupt technology, then what we really have is a really interesting avenue to really make progress against some of the hardest problems. So how many of you work on cancer research or climate research? A handful of people. How many of you have had a loved one or a friend affected by cancer? Okay, that's more hands. Okay, so for those of you who work in that field, you understand that that is a very, very, very hard problem. There's a very wide database of information, but it has to be very carefully tailored and personalized to the individual who has the condition. And for clinicians and for surgeons, it's a very, very challenging problem. So how would we best amplify the capability of the humans who have the ability to personalize that treatment with this corpus of data and information and understanding, which at this point is very, very large. It's very challenging to synthesize and integrate that information into a cohesive picture that's actually actionable. So let me shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the other themes that have come up during the meeting. One is this notion of the Internet of Things. Okay, I'm actually not a big fan of the Internet of Things. I actually think it's kind of underwhelming at some level, and Alberto touched on some of the issues today, and that just the infrastructure and the economic incentives for it are very weak. But let's suppose we were successful. Let's see where we're at today, even with the nascent system that we have. I think we're still viewing this from the perspective of parts. If you look at the history of the Internet of Things, what we really have is a bunch of gadgets. We have RFID, we have sensors, we have GPS, we have smart thermostats. So if we take a look at this, really what most of the commercial scenarios we're seeing are things that are at best things like self-monitoring utilities. At worst, they're things like self-monitoring mayonnaise jars or condiments, and that's not really an awesome technological future in my opinion. So where are the humans in this picture? Where is the amplification of human capability? How can we go beyond just a sensor network and an encyclopedia in the cloud to something that actually give us superhuman capability, particularly at the collective level? How do we take teams that today struggle with a lot of very basic workflow issues or struggle with a lot of friction in between how they interact with the machine and actually have them, you could have a team of 3 people capable as a team of 30. You could argue that's happened today even with computer-assisted design and infrastructure, but to take it to the next level. So how do we do better? Okay. So I think the other part of the problem that we have is we're still viewing man-machine systems from the perspective of a machine as a tool. Some of them were not that different from chimpanzees using sticks to fish ants out of anthills, right? It's a tool, or perhaps it's an automaton that allows us to not have to pay attention. And so this dichotomy is reflected in this graphic from the Apollo program. What you have here is you can either view it as, okay, I'm just going to have an automated system that takes care of things for the human. Hopefully it's reliable enough that it won't kill me, but then I'm very bored, I'm disengaged, and I'm not really taking advantage of any of the things that a human can bring to the picture. Alternatively, you could just view it as basically a decision aid or a tool, a food processor basically, or a navigation aid. In fact, the picture on the right is showing that done very badly because those 3 astronauts are struggling to keep up with the workload that they have to do. So right now we have a problem. We basically have heuristics and rules of thumb for how we think about designing humans and machines as a system. Right now we have rules of thumb like, okay, control systems, automation is really good for repetitive, targeted search. We use planning algorithms to accomplish those tasks. And then we say humans are good at uncertain qualitative tasks which require expertise. But that's not really very formal. It's not quantitative. It's certainly not verifiable. And so it's really a very hit or miss exercise. We don't have a good systematic basis to design a human-machine system that can reliably and consistently exceed human or machine capability. So I'll also call out that Adam Russell, my colleague, is going to talk about human beings. Human beings are the very messy part of this equation, and so I'm going to not talk about that part of the problem, but I'm sure he'll be happy to field your questions on that. So let's suppose we had some way to do that. So I've used words like formal and verifiable. So what that really is implying is that we need a mathematics and a language for us to be able to say something about how these systems behave. And the talk by Alberto hinted at some of this, is that the mathematics of these systems are actually quite complex, because this isn't just computers, this isn't just Boolean logic. We now have a variety of very, very incompatible representations of time, of state, of cognitive state, of function. And so I'm going to argue that we really do need to start from foundational level to say, okay, what is the mathematics of thinking about human-machine system design? So in this case, it's really a language of things like logic, of interactions, of interfaces, of transformations between different kinds of data, of state, of cognitive behavior, of probability, and so on. And really that is the concepts in mathematics that have really been mostly in the realm of pure mathematics. They are very, very recently just moving into the realm of application. This is actually a plot from Robert Grice, the University of Penn. This is actually an application of algebraic topology, which is very good for information fusion and inferring global state from local information. So what does that look like for the overall man-machine system? That's an open question, and that's something I'd like to engage with you on, is how do we start from the right foundations and build up to something that we can use to build, test, and confirm that we can make a man-machine system reliably that can outperform, or a centaur, that could outperform humans alone or machines alone. So with that, I'd like to say, what do you think that theory should look like? What are the right kinds of questions we should be asking? What are those systems, and what do we think the right applications for that would be? And from your perspective as a domain expert, what do you think the right challenges to focus on would be? With that, I'll thank you for your time, and I'll pass it on to Ivan and then Adam.
Well, thank you, John. So whatever are the changing interfaces, whether it's between humans and machines or any of the other myriad kinds of interfaces that John Main was speaking about, what we do know is that human beings and their social structures will be where all roads enter and exit. Last I checked, Adam Russell is a human being, right? So he's got some firsthand knowledge of that, but he's also bringing in a sort of social and cultural anthropology perspective on this. So, Adam, why don't you tell us how the humans are going to fit into all this?
All right, well, thanks, Ivan. Thanks again for being here. Thanks particularly for staying here, because I'm sure you've intimated that, as everybody keeps pointing to me, is like, and there's people, and Adam will talk about that, that you might have gotten this like sort of creeping sensations, the suspicion that I might bring up social science. So, social science. Blah, 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 social science. Which is exactly what I think an overly cynical friend of mine suggested is what you would hear if I talk about social science at an advanced technology forum. So, like every good DARPA program manager, I want to set some metrics on the ground, so here are my metrics. I would like to falsify that hypothesis with two measures. First, that you don't just hear blah, 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 blah. Feel free to raise your hand at any point. That's what it sounds like to you, and we'll get some medical attention. The second is actually that it becomes a little bit clearer, perhaps, why we are talking about social science at an advanced technology forum. So to continue the theme with tools and interfaces, I would like to kick this off by sort of bringing out from the social science toolbox one of the most venerated research interfaces we have. Goes by the technical name, hang with me here, asking people stuff. So I would like to ask people stuff. I have a great crowd here, hugely diverse, I'm sure, so I'd like to take advantage of this. Who's heard of the distinction between hard and soft sciences? Put your hand up if you heard that distinction. Okay, good, so now I know the sample I'm working with. Interesting. Put your hand up if you think social science is a hard science. All right. Put your hand up if you think social science is a soft science. Okay. Now, like any good questioner, we have additional follow-on questions. Put your hand up if you think social science is no science at all. That's all right. That's okay. That's all right. This is a level of honesty that every social scientist should envy. Now, put your hand up if you think social science is the hardest science. That's all right. Don't be brave. You are in good company. At least, as far as I know, only 2 Nobel Prize-winning physicists would agree with you, or at least reminded their own colleagues in physics how much harder physics would be if electrons could think and if electrons had feelings. So that's what social scientists have been wrangling with, are thinking, feeling electrons, ever since essentially social science started. the purpose of which is to try to make sense of social situations, and wherever you have humans, you've got social situations, that we perceive as complex. And the science part of this, as I understand it, is the idea that by looking at a necessarily finite number of samples, you can derive sort of generalizable, ideally predictive principles, equations, laws that help you not only understand the situation you're looking at now, but perhaps grasp other situations that are like that, or perhaps different, being able to explain that difference, right? That you're able to predict and understand future behavior through the scientific understanding and study of past behavior. That's where social science wants to go. So I'm sure some of you took your kids on summer vacation, so this question will sound very familiar. Are we there yet? To which I have two replies. One, I told you to go before we started this lecture. And two, kid, not only are we not there yet, we don't even know where we are right now. You may have heard of the crisis of reproducibility in a number of different social behavioral sciences. Have you heard of the crisis of reproducibility? Put your hand up. You will soon, I'm sure. There's much sort of gnashing of teeth and rending of garments. And that is that in those sciences, some of the canonical foundational results, the things that we thought we could take for granted, turn out possibly not to be that solid. There's difficulty replicating those results. There's questions about the actual statistical methods being used, all of which is, like I said, led to this deep soul searching of what do we actually know? And like every crisis, there are many factors that contribute to it. Today I would like to talk about one because it's topical, and two because it's ironic, which is that the effort to understand complex, emergent human behavior has to be done, at least for the foreseeable future, by humans. Which means that as tool-inventing and tool-using creatures, clever apes, we are also really at the mercy and limitation of the tools that we have available to us to try to understand those complex systems. And I would posit to you that the historical limitations of the tools that we've had at our availability have led to this dilemma in social science where we've either had to over-rely on observational data and hope that we can just flog correlation and get causation out of it, or we've had to overgeneralize by studying more controlled but smaller samples of humans and then just kind of talk about human behavior and hope nobody notices. The problem is, of course, that even we've started to notice. Fun fact for you, in 2009, a review of the top psychology journals found that 96% of the research participants in the studies in those journals came from areas of the world that represented 12% of the global population. So as an average American, you have a 300 times greater chance of being a research participant than someone from outside the West. So since we're talking about creating surprise, to me, the biggest surprise there is that we continue to be surprised that we're surprised. And this is not just a sort of trivial thing, because actually in the few cases where people have gone through what to date have been laborious, expensive efforts to try to test outside of the lab, outside in the real world, it turns out variance is the norm. Different social systems lead to different behaviors. Cue sound of forehead slapping. Sounds like an academic crisis, right? Except that as Forrester reminded us 40 years ago, our minds have not evolved to intuit the behavior of complex systems, which include social systems. So we need models, and many of those canonical results are the key assumptions that undergird some of our models. That's problematic. If those key assumptions are built on sand, then we don't know which models are broken but useful, and which models are just broken. But the reason I'm even standing here actually is because I'm optimistic in spite of what it may sound like. Because I think those tools and interfaces are changing, and they're changing fast. And in spite of the fact that a lot of people tend to think that there's a sort of scientific revolution that occurs leading to technological innovation, and history is replete with examples where technical innovation has led to scientific revolution. And I think that's where we are in the social sciences. I want to posit that actually you're seeing, if you look, the convergence and potential emergence of the social science equivalent of the telescope, the microscope, and why not the oscilloscope. This is what I mean. Telescope. We now have a capability, because of all these interfaces, to capture large amounts of data from far distances in ways that were simply impossible, that allow us to understand the structure and the properties of these social systems. The properties that form the context and the meaning for the behavior within groups and between groups. But more than that, we now also have microscopes available. We can neck down and get data at a level and fidelity that allows us to understand not just the structure of the mini-universes into which we fold ourselves, but what do those universes actually look like? or capture what the anthropologist Clifford Geertz calls the native's point of view. And that's really important when you're dealing with thinking, feeling electrons. And the oscilloscope. So this is not the answer, but I posit to you it may be part of an answer. What you're seeing here is a screenshot of an alternate reality game called Ingress. It's developed by Niantic Labs, deployed, and is currently being played, and I'll use that term in a very specific way, played by over 7 million people globally right now. Now, I don't want you to fixate on the term game, because a lot of people think, well, it's, that's what kids do. Actually, anything with a game, any game has rules, goals, and feedback. And pretty much every experiment we run is kind of a game. Yes, physicists, you're kind of playing games with electrons. A lot of research areas are also maturing quickly and realizing that games are powerfully motivating things, which makes them really good tools for understanding human behavior. Instead, let's think about the term alternate reality, right? Appropriate a future technology forum. That we now have a capability that just did not exist even, I would say, 5, probably 10 years ago. With all these interfaces, we can throw experiments out into the real world. We can layer alternate realities onto the real world using things like transmedia platforms, where that allows us, I think, for the first time, to really begin to ask questions, test many theories, test many hypotheses in many places, with many people, many times. And I think that's where we're going to get to the situation where, from a social science 2.0, if I may borrow Ivan's expression, where we might be able to begin to get really the boundaries of what we know, what we don't know, and what we can't know. Because if I'm trying to use a model to design a system or a policy, knowing the difference between what I don't know and what I can't know has important implications. I'd also add, if you think about what the future really is, just kind of an alternate reality. But we can't do it by ourselves. Somehow I'm speaking for every social scientist everywhere, we need your help. That's what I'm here. I'm here to implore you for help. And this is why we're at the Technology Forum in a very real way. Because we can't just adopt new tools and apply them in old ways. There be other dragons. We need to think about how these new tools and interfaces could possibly help us reconceive the entire social science research pipeline. How do you design experiments for a scale and scope of that size? How do you design ethical, engaging experiments where people want to be part of it? What and how do you collect these data? How do you protect them? How do you share them? How do you analyze them? How do you visualize them? How do you replicate them? And how do you do so in a rapid fashion that's really required to kind of put that science into there and help us get to, again, what I hope will be ultimately not just a better social science, but a social science that we can use to make ourselves better. And this murky world of interfaces help us use social science to make better teams, to make better organizations, and ultimately better societies. So I don't actually hear anyone openly laughing, but there may be some laughing on the inside. You may think this is crazy. You may think this is impossible. And you may be right. But again, in keeping with a theme of wait, what? My suggestion to you is for the first time, really the first time, and with your help, this question of whether we can make the impossible possible is an empirical one. That's science. And I'm particularly excited to drive towards that, and I hope you'll help us do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Adam. So what we really hope is that these 3 discussion leaders have disturbed you, have disrupted you enough that you want to get up to these 3 microphones, and I invite you to do so now, and to engage our discussion leaders, either pointing a question directly to one or to the entire set of 3. So please don't be shy. We had about 20 questioners in the last session, and I hope we can have the same here. So let's start with the gentleman in the middle. Yes, that's you.
Hey, hi. First of all, thank you for the fascinating presentation. So I just had a thought on your question, and then I had a demand signal I've just heard. So sorry, my name is Sadhan Sari. I work in the Office of the Secretary of Defense Policy. So I also wanted to articulate a demand signal that I've heard for something for what you're working on, and then a question. So your question was how does one think about the interfaces between humans and machines? Some friends and I back in, not too long ago actually, started a startup. They're from the Center of Bits and Atoms at MIT, which thinks about the interface between bits and atoms. And so I guess for human-machine interaction, we think about what are the comparative advantages of cells versus bits, or cells versus atoms. Taking it down to the basic level, maybe building up from there, starting from those first premises would be a good way of thinking about it. It works with the bits and atoms, so it probably works for cells and bits too, that one particular process. And comparative advantage, I think, is a very powerful tool for thinking through these things. For what you're talking about, like, I think there's actually real demand signals for it. In policy, I work on stability operations, and a lot of folks who are coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, they're like, look, in intelligence, we get a lot of intelligence on like who to strike, but we don't know if somebody is an extremist, like who's following them on Twitter, what are the socioeconomic variables, how do you use this information to predict instability? There's kinetic and potential energy in physics. In humans, what's the potential energy of a situation of instability working out? That's super useful, and that would be something in which technological endeavor that you'd work on would be very, very applicable. My question is, I did grad school at Yale. I decided not to do a PhD in social sciences because I saw that there were some upper asymptotes to social science as well. Some hypothesize that specifically neurology has a lot of hope for unlocking social science, and I was wondering what your thought is on that. Is it about neurology, or is it rather about mapping socio trends through data?
So just to clarify, your question is does neurology promise to unlock social science? Is that what I heard?
Yeah. So a lot of social scientists are like, oh, Steven Pinker and what the work he's doing.
Right.
Once we understand the brain as such, then we'll unlock the predictive possibility of social science.
So Adam, maybe you can respond to that a little bit.
Well, sure. So the way I think about it is there may not be a brain, there may be many brains. And that's what I'm particularly, I know I sound like a zombie when I say that. I like brains. The stuff they're doing at BTO is amazing. And I do think there's so much information to be had and transmitted, both how social systems shape brains, because we know that happens, and also how sort of fundamental core cognitive capabilities or processes of the brain contribute to sort of the different, the trade space in terms of social systems. So I think there's a lot of interplay to be had there. I don't think it's quite as easy as we'll understand the brain and then the social system will occur, because it's quite clear that dynamics change at different levels, right? So I don't think it's going to be quite, I wish it were that easy, but I don't think that's going to be the case. But I do think there's a really fruitful interaction to be had there. That's a great question.
Well, thank you, appreciate it.
I'd like to move over to the mic on the right. Yes, ma'am.
Linda Griffith from MIT in the biological engineering department, and I want to start with a couple of observations and then ask a question on. So the last talk, one impression you could get from it is social sciences. I was a person who raised their hand saying it's a soft science. It's sort of where chemistry was in the 1800s, early 1800s. It was alchemy, and then it became molecular in the late 1800s with Nernst and Oswald and so on, partly because of tools that were developed by physics and other things. So you have disciplines getting together in whatever way, and you change a soft science descriptive into something that's much more quantitative. And then to translate that into things that people use in society, you filter it through engineering. So you have a mechanical engineer and a chemist now getting together. Not much happens until you birth a whole new discipline of chemical engineering, which started at MIT and sort of familiar of it. So that's one thing. So I don't know if that's a perspective you have, that you, by putting those disciplines together, you may move social sciences more and more quantitatively with like the analogy of chemistry. But in a similar way, the comment was made by the second speaker that you need to get disciplines together, and how do we do that? And I'd argue that already, DARPA is very good at that, and I think specifically, for example, of the Biomicroinfo program, which really start by putting together biologists with microsystems technologists and computer scientists. You really launch the field of systems biology, and not just genetics like NIH does it. You launch this whole other area. And I remember being in a room with Tommy Yakala, one of the machine learning guys at MIT, Peter Sorger, cell biologist, Doug Laufenberger, who is engineer, applied mathematician, and they put together a proposal, and this really changed the face of MIT, and it helped to start an entire new department of biological engineering. So the second observation is DARPA is really good at these kind of disruptive things, but that sometimes you need to lead to new discipline, and part of this putting together, and we found that much like the analogy with chemical engineering, you need to emerge something like biological engineering that's an interfacial between the disciplines. So the question to you guys is, do you see new disciplines actually emerging like that? And where do you think things are changing, and how should institutions like MIT be thinking? We have everybody like in the infinite corridor mushed in together because it snows so much we can't go anywhere in the winter. So where do you see some disciplines merging? And I feel like we do a good job of this, the classic science and engineering, but what else do you think needs to be put together, and where do you see disciplines moving from soft to hard?
I'll take a stab at it. So I'm actually personally a huge lover of chaos. I love it because I think fantastic things come out of chaos. If I had my choice, and I actually see this happening, particularly at places like MIT, the canonical disciplines are actually going away. And there's so much, the breadth of technology now is enormous. And frankly, we're on a kind of a voyage of discovery. And we don't know what specialties we're going to need 5 years from now, certainly not 10 years from now. And so why shoehorn people into a discipline that was valid 50 years ago, but why not prepare them for the world to come and prepare them for that voyage of discovery? And it may mean it's
So if I could just answer back
Sure.
a little bit, I temper it a little bit. They're not completely going away. They're evolving. And it's hard to do in academia because of tenure.
Right.
And this is a whole other discussion. It is hard to move things. And this is why we started a new department. We just started from scratch, which is a hard thing to do anywhere because you didn't want that. They're evolving, or they need to evolve, or else you'll die. So, but you're adding new ones and getting rid of, like we used to have food and nutrition, okay? So
The trick is
I would
getting rid
argue
of the
you
old
still, I think, probably need disciplines, because you've got to get people at some point in their life to train in a way to think about the world so they can interact with other people and actually get somewhere, versus being, at MIT you see kids being too diffuse. They want to do everything, and then they can't really solve a problem because they know a lot of little things and not. So it's an interesting discussion, and we have it all the time at MIT.
Well, thank you. And this is a fascinating topic. It reminds me of a phrase that I love, which is sort of cultures of innovation. He questions, why is a place like Bell Labs, why was that so successful? What is a place like Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Janelia campus doing, in sort of sociocultural experiments to maybe advance biomedical science in ways that it hasn't happened before? It's an entirely different discussion, but what you were saying in this discussion made me think of that. I do want to move over now to the microphone on the left.
Josh Quivley from Spay War Systems Center Pacific. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about what you guys think about the future of the visual interface as one of the highest bandwidth reception inputs that we have as humans.
So I think the human interface is still relatively baud rate limited. So yes, the visual interface is fantastic. I think that there's a broader issue of just how do we systematically think through human-computer interface. But at some level, it's a very old topic. People have been working on it for a long time. It's how we've converged on the mouse and screens and touch screens and so on. So, that's a lot of feedback, sorry. Did I lose my mic? Oh, that's fine. I apologize. The interface is horrible. There we go. I'm sitting on my microphone. There we go. Yeah, that was a very bad centaur. That was the anti-centaur. So I think what I'd say is that I think you need a general set of principles about what it is that you're doing with the task and the cognitive workload of the individual, and what exactly. So that's really just a information interface between a person and the system you're interacting with, right? Tactile interfaces are very powerful. There are other senses we have which have high memory content, but I'm not sure that I've seen anything there that's new in a genuine way. Is it an area that's, I think, really ripe for research? I think it needs a more systematic grounding in some principles of neuroscience than correlation back to the overall system property would be my assertion.
I want to point out that there's a conspicuous emptiness over there on the right. As I point that out, I'm going to move to the center microphone.
Hi, I'm David Mascarenas from Los Alamos National Lab. So in light of the crisis of repeatability or irrepeatability that's going on in social science and psychology, how are you thinking about how you're going to change how you teach students going forward? And in light of the things that you've mentioned, what do you think needs to change in curriculum in psychology and social science? What do the students need to do in the future they're not doing now or learn?
Adam?
Did you say math? I was told to read no math. So my understanding right now is we still are at the stage of the impossible when it comes to trying to do this new social science that I really think needs to be the next step, because it's not obvious to me that doing the same thing but a little bit better is going to help solve the challenges. Although there are many reasons, like I said, that are going into the crisis of reproducibility, and much of it has to do with incentives, much of it has to do with education, et cetera. But I think my job, as I see it right now, is if we can prove the principle that this can be done, what people need to know will follow from that to continue to do that sort of research that needs, in my opinion, needs to be done to help start answering these really complicated questions about thinking, feeling electrons. So, I mean, to answer John, I think there's an inherent sort of element of chaos here that's really important and shouldn't be programmed out of this design too quickly. Because if I gave you, here's the curriculum of the future, one, I'd be wrong, and two, I might actually be doing a disservice. It's possible that the social science research team of the future looks like a movie crew, and who knows? And it may be that there's still social science done, but no social scientists. So I actually don't know the answer to that. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts.
So, well, along those lines, I don't know how much you've interacted with science and technology students, but do you notice any major differences in the types of people attracted to psychology and social science versus engineering and the more hard science?
None at all. I don't know what you're talking about. Exactly the same, just with calculators and no, I'm sure that's actually a great social science question, frankly. I know it's been done in the sense of demographics and personality type, et cetera. So I think that's true. But if I were to speak for other social scientists who, and this is, by the way, a really good time because I think social scientists are also deeply concerned about how we kind of solve this problem. This is not just Adam Russell on stage saying this. As you know, there's a lot of public foggy about this. I think there are people who are actually having a healthy debate now about what do we teach to try to deal with this. And it's not just stats, although that would help, frankly, in a lot of cases. Understanding an underpowered study would be useful. But to reference the last question that came up here, I think part of it also is data visualization. What skill sets do you need to be able to communicate really complicated data over different time series to help someone understand what's really going on in a social system? Because a bar chart and a t-test probably isn't going to do it.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm looking in this direction, I'm blinded, and the only thing I see is a human form with a hat on. And so I'm eager to hear a question from the man with the hat.
Thank you. So I'm a DARPA alum, a DSO alum, and I feel you guys need a blast from the past question.
Awesome.
Okay.
Hi, Ben.
So when I came to DSO in 2004, walked in the door, we were told DSO is DARPA's DARPA, and it's not a great DSO program unless it violates at least one law of physics. This is in the dark ages before it could violate a law of biology, by the way. So I hated that. And I quickly learned that what people really meant was it wasn't a great DSO program unless it violated somebody's misunderstanding of a law of physics or biology. And there's a huge difference. You don't know the difference, you're in trouble. So my question to you guys, and each of you is, what's the biggest opportunity, what's the biggest misconception that you think is facing each of you in your programs that affords an opportunity for real innovative progress?
Is that a trick question? What is the DSO?
Who's going to start?
You want to think about that one? I'll go first.
Okay.
All right. So I think a lot of what we wrestle with is to put Ben's statement in slightly different languages, is its problem framing, right? So in the spirit of what I just brought up about man-machine interface, a lot of the discussion is framed around strong AI, all this stuff, all this alarmist stuff about Hawking saying, or alternatively, if you listen to our plenary at Tom Deere this morning, it was around autonomy. Full autonomy is really bad. is that even the right framing for the question? I mean, is that a misunderstanding of what's really important in this conversation? So the thesis I just put forward was a statement of saying, okay, well, maybe that's not the right way to think about it. Maybe strong AI is not the right assumption to start the conversation from. Maybe the right place to start is that, there's a famous experiment by John Searle as a philosopher about the Chinese room experiment, which is if you have a computer that can take in Chinese symbols and generate Chinese symbols out, and you as a human being can't tell any difference, does the computer actually understand Chinese? Well, that's actually a deep question about semantic understanding and whether or not there's actual intelligence there or if it's just a symbol manipulator. I'm of the opinion that the latter is really more likely, and so a lot of this very alarmist conversation is really just the wrong place to start from. In the more systemic viewpoint of things, I think that we need to rethink how we think about systems design in a way that isn't just about risk management. It's really about allowing design and creativity, and Alberto was touching on some of this in the plenary, but we need machinery that isn't about stomping out unexpected things, but at some level allowing unexpected things to happen that are positive and interesting. And that's another way of sort of turning that on its head. Okay, now giving you guys time to think.
John,
There you go.
you guys want to weigh in?
So it's my turn. So as far as misunderstandings go, I don't know if it's exactly a misunderstanding, but one of the things that I find frustrating is that we've thought a lot about and talked a lot about the incredible amount of connectivity that we have, and that tends to degenerate into a discussion around big data. And I don't really have a problem with that. I think finding correlations in large data sets can be very, very useful, but I'm not sure it's the most useful place to go. Because if we have this massively connected group of 3 billion people, we may have the opportunity to focus them on problems and tasks rather than just trying to figure out what soap they use that day. And so I would rather, again, posing a different problem, looking at the same set of information, I would rather try to think about how can we leverage all that connectivity to do good things rather than to just pull marketing information out of it.
Because it's a Ben question, you don't get a single easy answer. I'd say there's 3 misunderstandings I worry about and probably one that I don't have to worry about. The first is the misunderstanding that if you want to know about people, well, I'm a people, so I can tell you everything you need to know about people. The second misunderstanding is it's easy, you're just not serious, right? That's a big misunderstanding. The third is it's so impossible, there's no way you can do it. So these, I think, are the misunderstandings I do worry about. The other misunderstanding I don't worry about that may have been here earlier is that social science doesn't need to be reconsidered and they don't need help. I don't think anybody has that misunderstanding any further.
Thanks for that question. Now I want to go to the microphone on your left.
Adrian Preda, University of California, Irvine. I have a comment with regards to social sciences. So one of the basic differences between social sciences and other hard sciences is that in social sciences, we have a moving target. In other words, an atom was an atom 20 years ago. If I'm going to repeat the same experiment, I should get the same results. But we're looking at a moving society and culture that literally changes from year to year. So doing an experiment today on college students might lead to very different results than 20 years ago. Even if I'm going to have 20 students from the same college, same age, and everything else being equal, because of the changes in the social cultural context, my experiment is actually different. So when it comes to reproducibility, it's not only statistics and opportunistic samples, but the fact that we operate with moving targets. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, you guys are people. You're entitled to the answer. So the first, I've got a couple of quick responses. The first is, if there are fundamental first principles that explain human behavior then and human behavior now, we wouldn't know what they are anyway. Partly because the limitations are our tools. So that's one challenge. Is maybe there are actually things that are in common that could actually help us begin to understand how those changes occurred. And that actually relates to my second comment, which is this issue again of reproducibility. And many people have come back and said, well, it's not unusual to have one study that doesn't replicate because subtle things have changed, and so the result is different. A science can tell you what those subtle things were, how they changed, and why that changed the result. And just hand waving and saying, well, you know, people are moving targets, and so of course you're not going to get the same result. That's kind of defeatist, I think, in a way. But it's not to take away from your point, which is, yeah, it's really complicated, which to my mind means that we don't have the advantage of just making one microscope. We have to make many microscopes. We have to make many telescopes. We have to make many oscilloscopes, and we have to use them a lot, because that's how we're going to get a better handle of this. We have to, you know, fail faster, because we can't wait for another 20 years to figure out what we thought we knew. Turns out to have been a couple of outliers that were tossed out of a t-test to get a better p-value, or things change but we don't know why. I think we could do better. But yes, it is moving. So everyone hark that people are very hard. Thank you.
To the man in the middle.
Hi, Sean Green with Chazzo Analytics. So humans are fallible sensors, right? We're biased, both due to internal reasons and external reasons. We can easily be biased by experimental design. We're error prone. We're gonna have misjudgments. We're gonna have mistakes. We're gonna have misattributions. And we're subjective, right? Yet, that's the sensors that are available in these domains, right? Particularly in social science, we are going to be one of the biggest sensors that there are. And to some degree also in HMI evaluation, right? We're going to be the sensor that's telling us what. So I'm wondering what you guys have as thoughts for how do we quantify, how do we build sensors that really are humans that have these issues?
So just to clarify, how would we build human-like sensors that wouldn't have those issues?
How do we design metrics? How do we design ways to measure humans that have these issues? I mean, we're trying to measure human behavior in some way that has these issues in order to do this type of analysis. How do we do that without falling into the same issues that we've had, basically?
You guys ask hard questions. So you'd have to know what the truth was, right? Yeah. That's right. Somehow you'd have to know what I mean, the only way I can think of it is somehow you'd have to know what the ground truth was and be able to compare that to what the human said. I mean, maybe I'm not, maybe we're not interfacing that effectively, but is that where you're going, or are you talking about creating a sensor that could do the same thing a human could do?
No, I'm talking about the human. So
Okay.
I mean, in a lot of cases, I think particularly in the social science area, there's a lot of cases where we're fundamentally asking humans questions about how things impacted them, right?
Right.
And how do we do that when the humans, they might have their own internal biases, they're going to misinterpret, they may have beliefs that are totally wrong as to how things work. How do we deal with that? How do we address those inconsistencies?
Deal with that sensor bias.
So unless you want to weigh in, I think maybe we can take that offline so that we have an opportunity to go to what I think will probably be the last three questioners, because we're down to almost about 10 minutes. So let's go to the microphone on our right.
Yes. I'm wondering if you're willing to reconsider what we mean by science. We usually use the physical sciences as our example of what science is. But it seems to me there are two assumptions underlying the way we think about science that need to be changed if we're going to deal adequately with social systems. One of them is that you can exclude the observer from consideration. We've made that assumption because we want objective statements, and the assumption has been that if you do the experiment correctly, you'll get the same results. But in social systems, it really matters who the observer is. You can just listen to a political campaign, or just look at a university and different disciplines. Everybody's working with different variables. So if you take into account the observer, you're part of the way there. The other thing, which has been mentioned by a number of people today, is that the theory affects the phenomenon. In the physical sciences, we assume that the atoms and molecules don't care what the scientists are saying about them. But in the social sciences, it makes a difference. So if Adam Smith creates a theory of economics and people act on it, the system changes. If Karl Marx creates a theory of economics and people act on it, the system changes, and so on. So you have a dialogue between theories and society. And so I think first we need to change the philosophy of science to include those two variables. And second, to deal with social systems, I think we need to think not in terms of interacting variables, but in terms of purposeful systems. What are the purposes of the individuals and the institutions? And if we use these reflexive ideas, for example, OODA loops, observe, orient, decide, and act, and include the scientist in there who is influencing the system, then I think we'll have a more adequate framework for doing social science research.
That was terrific. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, are you going to go? Okay. So, does anybody want to respond to that before I move to another?
No, that was great. Great.
Well,
great comment.
Yeah, no, really useful. And I think one way actually to help address this is to introduce more of the notion of prediction into the research that's being done. And I think, someone asked earlier about one of the things you can do to help deal with the reproducibility issue is pre-registration and actually getting people to, no kidding, put it down what you think is going to happen in advance. And you start getting people to do that, and they may actually have to start calculating, as you said, what impact am I having on this experiment if I actually have to predict the outcome.
So Adam, let's now move on. I see a repeat offender over here. I think I'm going to be able to get to you, but I want to go to a first-time questioner first. So let's go to the middle of Mike.
Hi, guys. My name is Mickey McManus, and I work at a place called Maya. Maya has been a pretty successful, I think, DARPA collaborator with you guys over the last decade and a half or so. What I wanted to do is maybe make one comment about the conversation here and ask one question. So the comment is, one of the speakers talked a little bit about Herb Simon's law about bounded rationality, and could we get past bounded rationality? And what we discovered in our DARPA work was that bounded rationality was actually a great thing that we could use as a constraint to push on things. So part of Herb Simon's thinking there was around a pair of scissors, and how the mind was like a pair of scissors, and one blade was the brain running the rules, but the other blade was the environment it pushed against. And so the bounded rationality said I couldn't do a lot of computation here, so I could actually encode it in the environment and use stigmergic collaboration. That's exactly what we did with data visualization stuff that led to Visage and SAGE and the Command Post of the Future work, which was largely run by two cognitive psychologists, Dr. Stephen Roth and Dr. Peter Lucas. So that was an interesting thing because it was about how do we actually use the limits that humans have, but also the strengths that we have to encode things in the world to actually get to better decisions. So that's my comment. I think it's actually interesting to think of bounded rationality as something that is a constraint that we could use to push against in different ways. The other part of that comment is that, as Adam talked about, why am I a social scientist at a tech symposium or something like that? It worried me really deeply when I heard that, having thought that DARPA engaged with social scientists all the time, coming from a place like Maya, where we basically use social scientists to work on really hard problems for DARPA. So that kind of shocked me a little bit in hearing that you felt you had to apologize a little bit. And I'm hoping that that was more sort of a rhetorical device of some sort. Yeah. So that's my comment. My question, and it's undoubtedly self-serving, but my question is, I've heard a lot about strategic surprise. What I'm worried a little bit about is strategic curiosity. How many DARPA people have walked up to random attendees to find out what they're doing and why they came? How many people who are speakers or who are presenting in the demo areas are actually asking questions of the people who they're actually talking to, or who are asking them questions about the demonstrations? I'm a little nervous that curiosity is low. Not just here, but I think in the world, because we believe certain fallacies about what's possible. And I raise all that because I worked on a project that was a pretty exciting project for DARPA. I'm pretty sure that most people at DARPA have forgotten all about it because those program managers have moved on, and now we're going to reiterate and reinvent the wheel over and over again. It'll be Mark Twain's sort of history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Right? So I'm a little worried about that, and I guess I want to ask you guys, how do you double down on strategic curiosity?
I had a poll. Okay, so don't look at me. But
we work in a very curious building. DARPA's, for those of you that don't know, it's one building in Arlington, Virginia. And it's probably one of the most curious places that I've ever been. I mean, I can just relate a story. When I came to interview for the program manager job, it was the most fun day I had ever had talking technology with people, because I talked to people across the spectrum who were all excited about their tech and wanted to get my opinion about it, and we had a lot of interchange. So curiosity abounds. I see a fair amount of it in the hallway, but I think we can always hope for more. Your question about memory at DARPA, I think that's by design. And it's by design so that the parts of the project that you worked on that weren't successful 4 years ago, 3 years ago someone can try it again, and there's no memory in the building of somebody being able to say, no, we tried that, you can't do that. So it's very much about the DARPA approach to science and technology development.
Can I tell one thing?
Go ahead.
We also have mechanisms, right, for intake of help us think about things we haven't considered. So, for example, I have a request for information out on social science, and I'm sure that's a sign, I think, a signal of strategic curiosity. Help me know what else can feed into this that I'm not aware of. So, help us.
All right, great question, and thanks for asking it. I'm going to pull the first questioner card again. I'm sorry, I hope I can get to you, but we have a question. Oh, okay, he's deferring, a very nice guy. So, okay, second question.
In physics and other hard sciences, we assume that the experiments are going to be repeatable, assuming they're done correctly, that the world actually is repeatable. One thing I don't understand when I read psychology and social science papers is, I mean, you can get really philosophical, but if we have free will, there's obviously a limit on how repeatable things are. So, as a field, what is the goal? What do you think you can actually predict? Like, what would be considered a success? Is it like trends or individual behaviors? What does the field consider a successful experiment? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me actually take your question and ask them, because actually part of the nature of the curiosity of our organization is we crosstalk, and so they're particularly interested in social systems because they're trying to design human-machine systems. So, what would you consider success? Actually, maybe not fair, but what are you looking for in terms of principles that you can adopt and use? What would you consider to be
So I actually think it's going to be really hard to understand human behavior globally, because as you said, there's probably not 40 brains. There's probably, I don't know, 4 million brains. Who knows? But I'd like to have a set of principles I can apply. I love the term purposeful group. Right. I would like to have a set of principles where I could reliably create a purposeful group. And to me, that would be an enormous success. And there's hints of that when you look in things like management literature, but it's not a scientifically based set of principles. It's typically an opinion or a set of opinions.
Okay, let's go to, I think, what will be the last question now. Gentleman on the right.
Kumar, DARPA. So I just wanted to follow up on the comment that was made earlier, having the observer in the loop. And that occurs in hard sciences as well. As you know, quantum mechanics, the role of the observer is intricately part of the system. So it is not new to social sciences. It occurs in physical sciences as well. So just a comment.
Quantum mechanics is hard.
Okay, it's hard. Fine. You win.
All right, well, on that note, I just want to thank all of you. As they say in the airlines, you have many airlines to choose from. Well, you had many breakout sessions to choose from, so thank you for being here. Thank you for being so engaged. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.